G'day legends, I hope that you're having a fantastic day and a fantastic start to your week. Now if you saw yesterday's video, you may be aware that I started my 6th round of chemotherapy yesterday evening. So today is day 2. I'm feeling it a bit, but I am okay so far, but it will get progressively worse as the week goes on. So if I have to have some time off or you see me struggling with finding words or explaining something, just bear with me. To be honest, we have that issue anyway, but thank you guys for all the support. Now, legends, of course, we have a lot to go over as we always do, but the main meat of this video is going to be talking about a massive shift I've seen in the Western mainstream media. And this has really taken place over maybe the past week as a very close observer of this. It does seem like whether from the Financial Times to the Sunday Times to the Telegraph, that they are starting to somewhat see the reality, and that these papers typically, which have a heavy bias one way, are starting to have interviews or articles which more reflect the actual situation of what we have been explaining for some time. And today is no different. We're going to go over potential massive offensives in summer, but I want to talk about it from my perspective of at least amateur on attritional warfare, and how I think we're not going to see what people think that we're going to see as far as decisive attacks. I just don't think we're in that stage of war yet, and attritional warfare doesn't really work like that. So we're going to go over that. We need to go over some of the recruiting of how Russia is recruiting from what I was sent actually across from someone I know in Russia. So up to date on those figures given. As well, we need to go over Russian drones, Ukrainian drones, and Trump not being happy at Putin, and he's not happy at Zelensky either. But I think he has had a lapse of memory because, well, it's not that drones are just going one way at each other's capitals. And of course, we'll be looking at the maps and also some frontline information that I have got from someone I know fighting in Sumy that is far different from even Syriac maps. So let's start with the drones and recruiting. So let's start firstly with this drone footage here. Now, what this is a Ukrainian FPV drone operating, and what you can see here is a fuel train. And this drone then targets this train, and of course, its fuel, it's very flammable, a large fire then breaks out. Now, originally it was reported like this, that these FPV drones from Ukrainian GUR Special Forces, they struck this train in the Melitopol district. Now, this isn't from then drone boats and then fly in, because that would be 200 kilometers or under, that it is potentially a long or maybe medium range FPV with a flight of 55 kilometers. And originally we thought that because we had seen mainly on the Russian side a lot of medium-range FPVs entering the fold. But then Zabity here, a gentleman in my Telegram, which you should come and join, he says, no, this isn't an FPV with extended range. This is a sabotage recruitment from GUR. FSB over the past 2 years has been combating lots of this operation. All their raids have been people with homemade FPV drones. Also, the inconsistency of the makes it a lot more like sabotage than actually extended range. Ukraine has not been able to stop Russian logistics on the line of contact, and this actually makes more sense. So what he's saying is it is Ukrainian intelligence services recruiting people behind the line, FPVs, to strike. Because if it was a new weapon entering the battlefield, we would see this happen more and more. So we'd have multiple times of this. So maybe wait out on that. But we do know that both the domestic intelligence services in Russia and in Ukraine are then combating a lot of uprisings and recruiting of people as well. So let's then talk about Russian drones. So last night there was a very large scale both missile and drone attack into Ukraine again, and Ukraine launched a massive wave of drones towards Russia as well. But in the most recent Garan attack, there's a lot of reports that an altitude record was set. Why is this important? Well, what's being reported is that some of the Garan drones, the Russian drones, were at 3 miles of height, so 4,900 meters, 4.9 kilometers. Now, this is important because the most effective and most efficient way, remember, efficiency and effectiveness are then synonymous in war, because war at the end of the day is an economic battle in protracted attritional war, of Ukraine to hit these, the best way for them to do it was by their mobile fire team, so basically a Toyota Hilux with a 50 cal on the back, or by anti-aircraft weapon systems such as the Gepard. The thing is, this height puts it well out of range of those. So 50 cal, look, it's hard with 50 cal. I've shot a lot of 50. As far as actual height on that weapon system and the slow rate of fire, you may be looking beyond a kilometre with vertical height. I couldn't give you a good number on that, but the Gepard, we have a better idea because it specifically to do this has a maximum vertical range of 3.5 to 4 kilometres. So this is sitting near on a kilometre outside of that, or 0.6 of a mile from the absolute max. But these are also reportedly flying much, much faster, which means these mobile teams, it's going to be much more difficult to get into position, same as getting helicopters in. So what this then does is these are traveling faster and higher and even more numerous. Well, how do you take these down? Well, you can't use these much cheaper systems. Sorry, 50 cal cheapest, or the next with being Gepard, although their 35 millimeter ammunition can be a problem, but it's way cheaper than having an F-16 in the sky or a chopper, and safer too. So you've got those options, or an air defense missile, which is super expensive. You might end up using $1 million missile on a $50,000 drone. This is going to become a big problem if we continue to see Russia's industry pump more and more of these out. What we do know is there's a lot of reporting about recent upgrades to these drones. So a larger warhead, almost double the size, but also an improved structure. So it can handle more G-forces, more pressure on than the actual fuselage of this. Why is that important? Well, it shortens the engagement altitude. So when I was flying in and out of Kabul, either on C-17 or C-130, they knew that systems available could only hit these planes at, say, let's just go 3 kilometers. So they knew that they were completely safe at that. But as we were coming into land, the pilot would dive the plane and land as soon as possible because they're in that engagement range. What we have seen, you can hear these like screaming like a dive bomber. And how this is being explained is because the fuselage can handle more, it can dive faster from a larger altitude. Therefore, it's reducing the time that you could actually engage that system. So these could continue to be a major, major problem, as they already are. Now, let's talk about recruiting for a second. I got sent this across of, hey dude, in case you wanted a current bonus and salary structure, poster I saw today in St. Petersburg. For information, I have to suffer through Finnish adverts, VPN, to watch your videos now. Thank you for those who watch ads. It helps me out. But the sign that he saw in St. Petersburg is basically saying that one-time payment of $31.5 thousand USD and a monthly salary of $26.50 USD. Now, what I haven't done here, and I should have done, you can call me lazy, is if you then put this into the purchasing power parity, this is significantly more. This is a lot as is, but this is a lot of money where in Australia or America where a loaf of bread costs $8. Of course, it's vastly different in different economies. So we can still see those handed out, and that will, of course, attract a lot of people. Now, talking about drone and missile strikes, Donald Trump has said this, and he's actually been very, very conservative, I'll say, on his caps lock button. Maybe it has broken. But he says, I've always had a very good relationship with Vladimir Putin of Russia. But something has happened to him. He's gone absolutely crazy. He's needlessly killing a lot of people. And I'm not just talking about soldiers. Missiles and drones are being shot into cities in Ukraine for no reason whatsoever. No, it's a waste of money to fire missiles and drones in. You fire these in for a number of reasons, whether it is to impact industry, critical infrastructure, or military targets as well. Even the most insane leader of anything, from terror groups to states, they're not going to just waste assets to hit nothing and target nothing, okay? I've always said that he wants all of Ukraine, not just a piece of it. And maybe that's proving to be right. But if he does, it will lead to the downfall of Russia. So he's saying if Putin keeps pushing that he wants all of it, it will be the downfall of Putin and Russia. But And in this, we don't really know. But as I spoke about yesterday, looking back at treaties, it seems like unless there is complete exhaustion of one side, all you're going to get is a delay before there is then more fighting, especially if no one's going to give solid, rock-solid security guarantees. But then Trump says this. Likewise, President Zelensky is doing his country no favors by talking the way he does. Everything out of his mouth causes problems. I don't like it, and it better stop. This is a war that would never have started if I were president. This is Zelensky, Putin, and Biden's war, not Trump's. So talking about gross incompetence and hatred, again, typical Trump talking points on that this would have been avoided, blah, 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 even though he gave a lot of weapons back in the day, but does also completely ignore that there are systems, last night went bloody everywhere. But what I will say about Trump is love or hate him. He is realistically the only one with great power who is actually trying to end the war. What I'll say of Trump is he underestimated the hatred between these states and he overestimated America's power and influence. I think there's been a lot of that too in other regions around the world. Will we continue to see more strikes? Absolutely we will. Absolutely both ways. So will the US back out? I don't know. I get asked this every day. Will we see the US walk away? The US is incredibly frustrated, but the US's frustration, if they want to turn that into actual impact, well, their actual impact they can have on Russia is significantly less than the impact they can have on Ukraine. Again, Russia is not costing billions upon billions like Ukraine is, and then America can say, well, we're cutting that. So his frustration with the war is how much it's costing and how long it's going, and he can easily more take that on Ukraine than he can Russia. Secondary sanctions on countries, the biggest effect he could have on Russia, I don't think he's willing to do that with the powers that he needs to do it for. Because if he's going to do secondary sanctions, if it's going to have effect, it has to be China and India. And I just don't see that it is in America's first interest to actually be doing that, given the American economy and unrest at the moment and coming off the back of tariffs or still in that. I just don't know. Okay, let's have a look at the maps. Well, firstly, we'll jump onto here. Of course, this is Ukraine in the center of your screen, the capital of Kyiv. The red area is occupied since 22, the purple since 2014, and any red check that you will see on this map is ground that Russia has made over the last 24 hours. Now, one thing I will say about Deep State is in their attempt to reduce Russian kilometre squares gains, they actually make the situation look worse for the Ukrainian forces, indicating that they're surrounded in areas. But where I want to come up into first, before we look at that, is actually into Sumy. So, of course, this is where Russia has crossed and was confirmed yesterday that they now occupy about 63 kilometre squares. There was slight grey zone shift in here towards Lochnia and a little bit in Bilavody, I believe, as well. Let me click forward just to, the west of Bilavody. But a couple of places I want to point out to you. Let's put this so I can see it, is right here. So, talk about Konstantinivka here, and this Volodymyrivka just to the east of here. What I was told from someone fighting in this area, confirmed fighting in this area, I know the bloke, is that we were engaging enemy forces in both of these areas. Not drones, we're engaging soldiers. So in here, 700 meters of cross-border, and in here, don't know how far, but because this is long, but maximum of maybe 3.5 Ks, maybe down to a couple of hundred meters. So from my understanding, this should be great. From what I'm hearing, I don't know the exact outcome of what then occurred here. But let's keep an eye out up here. Let's firstly look at Suryak maps. And he says Russian army took full control over the locality of Bilavody, which is just here. Now, I actually believe this map is likely both a little bit behind, because if we look at this footage, which is geolocated, so we have Bilavody and then we have this Yablonivka, the best way is we see these tree lines, you have 1, 2, and then the third one is right at the start of this then third tree line or small creek line, whatever this is here, excuse me, some 3.5 kilometers behind the nearest then point, we have a Russian soldier here with then a unit flag geolocated. So a long way back there. I think this area in here, keep an eye on it. We know Putin has talked about a buffer zone. We know there's a lot of operations in here. And what I'm getting told behind the scenes, operations to the west of this as well. Keep an eye out. Now, let's have a look at some other sectors on the map. Now, we'll come down until we do see some of this red check. Let's turn this back on. Now, Zoroya. This is an area for well over a week that Suryak has said that the Russian forces are in Zoroya. And today, DeepSat map is showing this out from Alexanderpil, some 5.5 kilometers. Now, what I'll say is I think this has ground forward over a number of days or weeks. But if not, 5 kilometers is a long way. Go and run 5 kilometers. Probably can't. Go and walk 5 kilometers. It's a long way. That is a large advancement. And if there is advancements of 5 kilometers per day on a front line, which has been relatively static, attrition, or protracted, that should be of major concern. But see how Mykolaiv, Romanivka, it's looking like surrounded in here. This is one of these areas. I'll show you a better example in a second, where in an effort to try and reduce how many kilometers that the Russians have got, it actually looks worse than it is. Realistically, I believe it more looks like this, just the way that a grinding war of attrition forward works, okay? It's not a war maneuver, but we see this is Zoroya, this is Romanivka, that Suryak is saying basically, draw a line down there, that this is all then connected and that the Ukrainian forces are pulling out of this sector rather than these large envelopments that are then occurring as well, more pushing out of, this is Pokrovsk East, by the way, more pushing out to the north towards Popov Yar, Poltavka, just in this sector. Not surprised one bit to see that. Exactly what Russia will do is they will push, fatten, makes sense. Next move will be to connect Zoroya, Romanivka. That is an ultimate fatten, and then they'll, in my belief, let's zoom out. Once this is connected, which could be over the next couple of days, we see this, we will see further northern push, and then we'll see simultaneously a push to the west as well. Just keep an eye out on that. Could be incorrect, but if we keep seeing what we are, that makes sense. And then just a small update. We see this Yelazativkia in here. Let's bring this back up. That just in this sector here is getting filled in by the Russian forces on this small envelopment taking place. Now, let's move our way down to Velika Novosilka. Now, we have then Velika Novosilka, we have got the western side and the northern side. Let's focus on the western side. This is, again, where to cover kilometre squares, it looks worse than it is. So this is showing that from here, here to here, there is a 1 kilometre gap on open ground, 1 tree line for Ukrainian forces in here to come out of. In reality, I believe this more looks like this, and as this has been stepping backwards, the Ukrainian forces have taken up other positions. Again, if not, this is going to be catastrophic. Ukraine can't afford to lose large amounts of guys in more envelopments like we've seen multiple times. They have a manpower shortage. The manpower is the single most important element of war. I don't give a fuck about fabs or drones or planes or navy or blah, blah, blah. If you don't have infantry, you don't have a war. Anyway, we see this in here. Let's bring up this map here, and you can see this, I believe, is more what it is, of just a push across through Zeleny Pole and Novopil as well. Then let's move our way up, and we have, of course, the Bahatar-Odrane front. Now, of course, grey zone should be over Odrane. Flags went up all over yesterday. Grey zone, at least in Bahatar as well. Flags went all up last week. There's still probably a lot of fighting there, but more confirmed control in here. And then this is what then Suryak says, that just to the northwest of Odrane, some ground was made. That's that red dot, and that this is coming under control. Again, it looks more like you would expect in an attritional battle compared to a maneuver battle. Let's move then our way up until we come to Siversk. Now, I won't show you on the map that I've drawn up. There was claims that the Russian forces are about here, okay, round about in this area. This is by multiple maps as well, and there are some geolocations around Verkhonomayansky. Again, not enough to give us like confirmation that they're there, but coming up on Siversk. Now, what we see today, have I written anything else? No. What we see from that area to here, flat, open terrain. As we can see from this drone in then behind the line, we can see what the Russians will be looking at. Again, flat, open terrain, and these is a fab I believe 3,000 landing on these first buildings here. Let's see the impact first. Oh, sorry, too far. Fab come in and massive explosion from a Fab 3. That appears to me it's probably a Fab 3000 at that size. This is geolocated right to about here, and that makes sense for weapons like Fabs. Is you say the Russians are here, it doesn't matter. They're going to have to move across this flat open terrain, and these first line in here are going to cause chaos. So I think we'll see more and more Fabs and other weapon systems targeting some of those buildings, but I still believe it won't be an up the guts attack like that. We'll try and see more movement through some of the remainder of Luhansk Oblast. Of course, I missed this the other day just in these forest areas, but coming from the Terny front more toward Liman, Yampil, at least much larger scale than we'll go over in this video. So I said that the media is sort of starting to see the reality. And this Financial Times article, like some others we've gone over, this gives us the evidence, I believe, of this. This FT article said, expect no miracle. Ukraine braces for Russia's summer offensive. And as I said, we're seeing more and more of the mainstream sort of coming to the terms of where we have been explaining for a year. Trump's threat to withdraw US support and walk away from Russia-Ukraine peace talks has raised alarm in Kyiv, setting the stage for what Ukrainian officials and soldiers expect to turn into a bloody Russian summer offensive that could reshape the war's trajectory. No, it won't reshape the trajectory. It will cement the trajectory. Also, keep an eye out for impacts on morale if the US pull out, or even the US teetering on that will have huge psychological impact on those guys at the front line who already are struggling psychologically. This is exactly what I said about the Russian forces who fought in Syria, and then when Syria fell, of how they will really be feeling towards the government, and how the soldiers, the Ukrainian soldiers here with the US, how that will feel. Imagine if you knew that the most powerful and your largest ally, least of support, was pulling out already when you are withdrawing in the war. While Ukraine's leaders continue their push for a 30-day ceasefire, many people are under no illusion about Russia's years-long war winding down anytime soon. We know 30-day ceasefire, it was never going to happen, and no illusion that this is going to end soon. They argue Russia shows no sign of scaling back its military assaults or making real concessions. Yes, war is politics by other means, and diplomacy and politics isn't being done, so the war will continue. On Thursday, Putin announced that his forces were creating a security buffer zone along that border in the area of Sumy that I showed you. There's large maximalist goals of this that people release on maps with fucking lines on it, but realistically, wait and see. Washington's oscillating support for Kyiv has only emboldened the Russian leader. After speaking at length with Putin on Monday, the US president informed Ukraine's Volodymyr Zelensky the two sides should settle terms of peace deal among themselves. And it's not oscillating support. It's the US trying to use their leverage, and their leverage on Ukraine is that support. So we can take away, we can also give back. This is one of the problems with no movement on any sanctions towards Russia, is then you're not giving any leverage on, hey, we can give something back and then take it back away as well. European governments too have been slow to act on pledges to bolster security. Yeah, absolutely. Europe has been late on every delivery. There's deliveries from years ago. They're not there. The million shells, no one talks about that anymore. The Czech 750,000, no one talks about that. And they're not willing to do any security or reassurance forces without the US. Okay? This Yehor Vesov, a Ukrainian MP and a drone unit commander in Ukraine's 109th, said his country faces the harsh reality that Russia's confidence may outlast Western unity. And I think that is a very fair assessment. Putin is convinced he can break Ukraine. He simply believes our complete capitulation is only a matter of time, and the US might stop its aid any day now. He sees Europe as weak and indecisive. So I absolutely agree that Europe is incredibly indecisive. That's what happens when you've got 27 states who can't agree on anything. They can't agree on the most basic bits and pieces, let alone a war. Complete capitulation, I don't think so. I think it will just that he sees that the longer this goes on, the better and better leverage that we're going to have, and for the Russian side, the better conditions that they can then impose on Ukraine. That I see at this point in time is extending the war in the favour of Ukraine or Russia. So therefore, they will continue that. And if it was the other way, it would be the other way. But we see if all these leaders are calling out Putin extending the war, then that gives you enough evidence to say, well, then obviously they weigh that it's in Putin's favour to extend that war. If it was the other way, they'd be saying, oh, Putin's trying to end the war early. Okay, Moscow is regrouping ahead of what soldiers and analysts said is the lead up to a new big push in the months ahead. Now, I think we'll see the same rate of push in the months ahead. Again, attritional war, unlike what experts and officers will say, it's not won by decisive battles. It's a grind away to exhaust the other side's forces, and then you can start doing more manoeuvres and imposing more requests. Ukrainian troops on the Eastern Front said that Russian infantry are darting around on motorcycles, buggies and electric scooters. That he says they basically, they're a swarm of locusts, not one great wave, but an endless stream. So continuing that pressure. Again, the same people that meat wave, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't line up with what the reality on the front is or what actual soldiers say. They don't care about losses. They just keep coming. Not to take kilometres or metres, wrecked trenches, a few blasted trees, and the shell of a house. So yeah, the cost of grinding forward in attritional war is massive. And given the figures, which are all inflated or deflated, whether it be from Moscow or Kyiv, it's hard to get an idea if these are Pyrrhic victories or not. Likely from the replacement that we're seeing, likely not, given that's actually been able to increase as well. But again, we can't be sure. Fighting has intensified in recent weeks around Pokrovsk, Konstantinivka, pressuring strongholds of Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, and approaching the neighbouring Dnipro region. So, yeah, keep an eye on that. And this is what Mr. Surge said of if your cards, Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, these are only useful if you actually play them. An ace in your hand is an ace in your hand. It needs to be on the table. Now, aiding the infantry is Russia's heavy and high-tech weaponry, blasting its way through with glide bombs, missiles and drones. New models connected via fibre optic cables which make them immune to electronic jamming. No, I think what is aiding Russia the most is cost-effective, numerous weaponry, not extreme technology in very low numbers. Again, war is still an economic challenge. And we have seen, look at the Soviet space race, that the ability to do something 20% worse, but for way cheaper. And that's what I think we'll see tanks move into in every state is much cheaper tanks, but much more of them. German tank versus T-34. Way fucking better. But you can produce 8 to 1. We see this with many, many different systems. A Storm Shadow, I know this is apples and oranges, but a Storm Shadow, or even a French Hammer, or something like that, is a way better system than a glide bomb. But there's a couple of hundred of those, and Russia's looking to make 75,000 glide bombs a year. We need to focus on a numerical value as well, not just qualitative. But of course, in your capitalist military-industrial complex, R&D pays, and just numerical values doesn't have the same sex appeal, therefore shareholder appeal. However, the Ukrainians remain a formidable force on the defence. We expect gradual Russian advances, but no imminent collapses, no collapse of the front line. And I agree with this guy here. Again, but it is attritional war, steady, gradual advance. No imminent collapse, but then he says no collapse. And I say, no, there's still possibility of collapse when we see the bankruptcy scheme of a fall off a cliff. Where will that collapse go? The collapse goes, if there is, it goes until there is a physical border. Whether that is mass defence line you can't go through, or it gets to something you don't want to cross or too costly. Most of history has been a body of water. The Ukrainians are now much less dependent on the US for artillery supplies. The Europeans have stepped up, saying Russia has only slight superiority on artillery fire. I completely don't agree with that. NATO Secretary, NATO head Mark Rutte has said that Russia is outproducing 4 times in the shells. With artillery, I put drones, fabs, and barrel artillery all under the same sort of headline. No, it's not slight. I think it's massive, especially when we take into account heavy arty like fabs. Deputy Commander of an assault unit near Pokrovsk said, we're still holding the line, but we're exhausted. This guy's fought for many, many years. Recent developments have forced him and his troops to ignore the news because it sends them into a rage about basically political theatre. He says it's just noise, propaganda and lies. The war has narrowed his world to the next mission, the next fight. So much that at times he doesn't feel human. I'm just a zombie. And this political theatre, the political theatre being played, does ruin morale if you're the side who will be giving up something. And the political theatre being played from Zelensky through to Trump through to Putin, they need to be very aware of what that does on the front line and how they are feeling about that. Because at the end of the day, the infantry is the one doing the fighting, not those sitting around in Turkey. That sense of exhaustion and frustration is spreading through the ranks. And I'll say this spread can spread like cancer. They're saying morale is fraying, worn down by a growing feeling there is no clear plan to end the war, and that lives being sacrificed for nothing. And there is no clear plan to end the war, not by victory, not by capitulation, not by loss. There's no real clear plan to end this. And remember, what Zelensky was saying up until 8 weeks ago, the Kursk will be used to negotiate territory when the time comes. So, well, that's now gone, and you can get these guys' idea of, well, what are they going to be sacrificed for if we're going to give it up as well? And this can lead into all sorts of problems after the war also. He says, this gentleman here, his unit operates then Abrams and German Leopard tanks. He says that even the best equipment cannot compensate for flawed planning that has sent his men into harm's way. In recent months, it starts to feel like we're being erased, like our lives are being treated as disposable. These problems are systemic, not personal, urging a sober reassessment of the operational capacity and a strategy that matches the battlefield reality. And this is something you and I have been touching on. Now the media is starting to come on for probably a couple of years now. The command, they must be able to see through propaganda. Those making decisions need to be able to see through what is propaganda and what is the reality. Because if propaganda starts seeping into command political decisions, then that gets influenced, and propaganda, your own propaganda is influencing your own decisions, that's really bad. So what this guy is talking about as well is that the capacity, strategy needs to match the battlefield reality, not what people might want the media to put out there or people to see it like. And that is a very, very hard piece. You need propaganda believable enough that it increases support and the will to fight, but you can't have your own senior command start drinking the Kool-Aid. It's very, very dangerous. The war has exposed long-standing weaknesses in Ukraine's command structure. Fixing them is difficult. Reforms are underway, but doubts linger about whether they'll go far or fast enough to meet the moment. Again, the corruption, the problems, the Soviet hangover in militaries, it absolutely has had huge impacts on the Russian and Ukrainian forces. And one of the big ones we've seen recently is then Russia putting in General Andrei Mordachev, of course, is a Russian officer, not a Soviet officer, into the head of ground forces who has real combat experience. And I will say for both Russia and Ukraine, now that we are, let's go 3.5 years into the war, there's no excuses for reforms to be well behind. And the West need to push on these reforms to take place as well. And as I said, it's years and years. A lot of this should have been bloody pushed out by now. And hiding it is not the best way. As the US justice system says, sunlight is the best disinfectant. And because of that drinking Kool-Aid of propaganda, and if you actually, hey, that's not great, this corruption is not great, you will either be hunted down online or hunted down physically by intelligence services. You're not bringing sunlight to it, therefore it won't ever get fixed. Manpower remains one of the most pressing issues. At a Kremlin meeting on economic development this month, Putin claimed up to 60,000 Russians volunteered to join, double the roughly 30,000 Ukrainians he said were being conscripted. Some analysts believe figures are slightly inflated. Yeah, I agree. I think Russia's probably recruiting about 60,000 a month, but these are recruited volunteers rather than, I have no idea how many Ukraine is conscripting, but Ukraine is not getting that many volunteers, and conscripts on the front line will not perform like motivated volunteers. Even if that motivation is money, they've still stuck up their hand to go, not physically nabbed off the street. Ukraine's refused to lower its conscription age below 25, resisting pressure from the US and other allies. Its mobilisation drive remains riddled with corruption and forced conscription. Again, this, after 3 and a bit years, absolutely should have been fixed. Even if you just sacked everyone and replaced them with people, that's a cut off the head way to fix it, including recruitment officers nabbing unregistered men off the street, see that every day, and stuffing them into vans. People make out like that's a tiny bit. No. Or that it's staged. No, that is absolutely true. A recruitment drive to attract 18 and 24-year-olds has largely failed, with only several hundred applicants. Same as application in Poland as well. Completely fell over as well. That you still need motivated people. You can script who you want, but they need to still be motivated. And that 18 to 24 conscription thing will be a very large sticking point for America. A rare bright spot for Ukraine remains its domestic drone production, able to inflict serious damage and stall some of the Russian advance. Yes, I agree. Not then having infantry. I saw people online today, some of the biggest pages claiming that Ukraine doesn't need infantry because its drones will push back the front line using AI. We're nowhere near that capacity of war so far. I don't think we'll ever be at that capacity of war. Infantry is not going away. Ukraine's military is also borrowing from video game culture to incentivize drone units, and also guys that have played games before. Digital points, verify your loss, you get points, then you can get parts and equipment on basically a marketplace, as if updating your gun on Call of Duty. But what this can mean is that the better units get better stuff and the shitter units don't then get anything. It should go of importance of that front line, okay? But what I believe is I don't think Ukraine is dominant in the drone space anymore. They were in the beginning in short-range FPV, absolutely. I think more recent, in the past couple of months, because again, war, until we see something, it's probably been that way for a couple of months, if that makes sense. It takes a long time to observe this. Hindsight is 2020. That Russia has overtaken drone capacity, especially around FPVs and fiber optics. And Russian teams, they have that advantage on video games already. I know this isn't specifically talking about that, but when people say, Ukrainian teenagers played PlayStation, so therefore they're more have the dexterity to play. Russia has PS3s. You can probably get a fucking PS5 there at the moment. The sanctions seems like everything can come in. So yeah, okay. And all of these things where it's like points and money and shit to take out targets. I just don't know if understand the idea. I just don't know if in war it'll really have the effect. Should go by what's most needed, and that needs to go by what the unit needs, but also where is the unit sitting. Okay. Valery Zaluzny, Ukraine's top former general and pushed out by Zelensky, has warned a London audience not to expect a kind of miracle. With an enormous shortage of human resources and the catastrophic economic situation we're facing, we can only talk about a high-tech war of survival. The priority for Ukraine was a way to fight in a way that uses minimal resources and minimal economic means to achieve maximum effort. And I agree with this. But at the end of the day, all systems in war, from a battleship to an aircraft carrier to a fucking Shiwi in modern war, all of this is to move the infantry line forward. Infantry seize and hold ground. Nothing else can seize and hold territory. It is infantry to do this. And what you're trying to do with these high-tech systems, from fighter jets to bombers to through to a aircraft carrier, this is to have more effect on your other side and reduce on yours. But it doesn't mean that you can't then have that infantry. You need infantry before anything else. Exactly the reason why Ukraine is moving people out of the Air Force into then the infantry. But yes, high tech, I think more medium tech. You need something to be at massive amounts too, that forgo quality to have just quantity of the system. You need maximum effect. I get that, I understand that, but I just don't think that this in here, which is correct, is then being reflected with some of the weapons being asked for. That I'd go, well, fuck, can we get a Taurus? Would be great, but would rather just 1 million artillery shells. Okay, last one. Russian missile strikes hitting civilian areas in Ukrainian cities well beyond the front line remain a serious concern. Yeah, these strikes everywhere should remain a large concern. It is hitting industrial sectors, critical infrastructure, all of this. But again, war is never won and lost off strategic strikes. You can't just rely on that too. It needs to be done simultaneously and successively with Frontline movements, saying 200 missiles in some of these. Russia's now producing more rockets than it launches, while Ukraine's Patriot interceptors are running low. This can't be correct, because I was told that in 2022 Russia was running out and that the sanctions wouldn't be able to produce any of these. So that's false information. I don't know where they're going at that. Smoke in the glass Barbie. Drone attacks are all intensifying. Russia launched 2,000 Iranian Shahed drones in the first 20 days of May, and the number is becoming more unmanageable. Now, what I have heard is, through some pages, have been looking, and Russia's looking to produce like 1,000 a day or something fucking ridiculous. Maybe it's not that many. Maybe it was 1,000 a week. But whatever it was huge. And this becomes a problem, because simultaneously, successively, and more efficiently, in conjunction with frontline movements, that's how war works. War is an organism, okay? It's all at once. More will get through and hit their targets. Russian drones have also been upgraded, now fly higher, faster, making them harder to shoot down with machine guns, or basically impossible. Patriots F-16s, both in short supply, are often the only viable counters. Those are not viable counters to drones, not at all. Especially with the F-16s going down, and Patriots, no one in the world has that amount. You're not going to hit a fucking $50,000 drone with a $2,000 missile. Many soldiers and increasingly officials say the country must brace for a long asymmetric struggle. I don't know if it's a symmetric struggle. I think it's going to be very symmetrical. I think it's going to be grinding until we reach an area where asymmetric struggle. I don't think it's going to be that, if that makes sense, but it's going to be many different factors. How long will it last? Until we break the Russians' belief that we can be defeated. So Mr. Fursov here, he is saying that, well, we will fight until Russia figure out that we can't be defeated, that the cost is too high, and then they will withdraw. But will that hit before then Ukrainian forces saying that we need to have a level of peace on the front, or at least a ceasefire? Because at the end of the day, the forces drive the politics, that you may just see people refuse to fight or mass desertions, and at the end of the day, politicians are just a reflection of the state. But what will we see? Legends, I hope you have a fantastic day. This wasn't meant to be this slow. I've got a killer headache. Look after yourself. I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.